The rusty mailbox still bore my grandfather's name when I first drove down that gravel road. 3 months after his funeral, I was the reluctant owner of 127 acres that nobody else in the family wanted. "Good luck with that money pit," my cousin Jake had laughed, shaking his head as he signed away his inheritance rights. Standing in the overgrown driveway, I understood why. The farmhouse sagged like a tired old man, its paint peeling in long strips. The barn leaned precariously to one side, held up more by habit than structural integrity. But it was the fields that really told the story of neglect. Patches of sickly yellow crops struggling through dark, almost black soil that seemed to swallow seeds whole. My grandfather had been a proud man, but the last decade of his life had been a slow surrender. Neighbors whispered about his cursed land and how nothing grew right anymore. The soil looked rich enough, almost too rich, but somehow crops would sprout, struggle, then fade into disappointing harvests. I kicked at a clump of that strange, dark earth. It felt different under my boots, denser, heavier than normal farmland. There was something almost magnetic about it, the way it seemed to pull at metal tools and cling to everything it touched. "You're making a mistake, son," old Mr. Henderson had called from his pristine farm next door. "That land's been nothing but trouble for 20 years. Cut your losses and sell to developers." But standing there in the fading afternoon light, watching shadows stretch across those mysterious fields, I felt something my grandfather must have felt too. This wasn't just land. It was a puzzle waiting to be solved. The local farm supply store fell silent when I walked in. Word travels fast in small farming communities, and everyone knew about the city boy who'd inherited the problem farm. The clerk, a weathered man named Pete, barely looked up from his newspaper. "Need some starter seeds," I announced, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Pete's eyes crinkled with barely concealed amusement. "For the Henderson place? Son, you'd have better luck planting money trees." The other customers chuckled, and I felt my cheeks burn. I bought corn, soybeans, and wheat, standard crops that should grow anywhere in our zone. Back at the farm, I spent days preparing the soil, following every manual and YouTube video I could find. The earth felt strange under my hands, almost warm, with an oily texture that left dark residue on my gloves. 3 weeks later, my crops emerged in the most bizarre pattern I'd ever seen. Some sections flourished with unnaturally green, vigorous growth. Others produced stunted, yellowing plants that seemed to struggle for every inch. The pattern made no sense. It wasn't related to drainage, sunlight, or any farming principle I knew. "Looks like a patchwork quilt from hell," my neighbor Jake observed, leaning against his truck. He'd driven over specifically to witness my failure. "Maybe you should try growing rocks instead." The mockery stung, but something deeper bothered me. The thriving sections weren't just healthy, they were extraordinary. The corn stalks in those areas grew twice as tall as normal, with leaves so green they almost glowed. It was as if the soil was selectively choosing what to nurture. That night, I stood in my fields under the stars, running that strange, dark earth through my fingers, wondering what secret lay buried beneath my feet. By my second season, the pattern had become even more pronounced. I'd mapped every section of the farm, noting which areas produced miracle crops and which seemed cursed. The thriving zones formed irregular shapes across the property, some circular, others long and narrow, like underground rivers of fertility. Local farmers started driving by just to gawk. "There goes the patchwork farmer," they'd say, pointing at my fields that looked like a crazy quilt of green and brown. The successful sections were so dramatically different from the struggling areas that aerial photos made my farm look like abstract art. I tried everything: different fertilizers, soil amendments, irrigation systems. Nothing changed the fundamental pattern. The good sections stayed phenomenal. The bad sections remained stubborn. Soil tests came back inconclusive, showing normal pH and nutrient levels across the entire property. "Maybe it's cursed," suggested Maria, the young woman who ran the local coffee shop. She wasn't mocking like the others. There was genuine curiosity in her voice. My grandmother used to say some land holds memories. Her words stuck with me. I started researching the property's history, spending evenings in the county records office. The farm had been in my family for 4 generations, but before that, the trail went cold. The earliest deed I could find was from 1887, when my great-great-grandfather bought it from the county for back taxes. One evening, while walking the boundary lines, I noticed something odd. The thriving crop sections seemed to follow specific pathways across the property. From above, they might look random, but at ground level, there was definitely a pattern, like someone had drawn invisible lines across the landscape decades ago. I knelt in one of the productive zones, digging deeper than usual. About 3 feet down, my shovel struck something that wasn't soil. The metallic clang echoed across the empty field. I'd hit something solid, something that definitely didn't belong in farmland. My heart hammered as I dug carefully around the obstruction, using my hands to clear away the dark, clingy soil. It was metal, old, corroded, but unmistakably man-made. As I cleared more dirt, I realized I'd found a section of pipe, maybe 6 inches in diameter, running horizontally through the earth. The metal was unlike anything I'd seen, with a strange blue-green patina that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. Following the pipe's direction, I walked across my property with new eyes. The thriving crop sections weren't random. They followed the underground pipeline system. Wherever these mysterious pipes ran, the soil above produced extraordinary growth. That night, I called the County Historical Society. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly librarian, listened to my description with growing excitement. "Oh my," she breathed. "You might have found remnants of the old mining operation." Mining operation? Before your family owned that land, it was part of the Blackstone Mining Company's holdings. They extracted rare earth minerals there in the 1880s. The operation was shut down suddenly. Some kind of accident, I believe. The company went bankrupt and the land was sold for taxes. Rare earth minerals. My mind raced as pieces started falling into place. The strange soil composition, the selective plant growth, the metallic residue on my gloves, it all pointed to mineral contamination. But instead of poisoning the land, somehow these minerals were creating super fertile growing conditions. I spent the next week researching rare earth elements and their effects on agriculture. What I learned made my hands shake as I turned the pages. Certain rare earth minerals in specific concentrations could dramatically enhance plant growth and nutrient uptake. My cursed farmland might actually be sitting on a fortune. I hired a professional soil analysis company, paying extra for comprehensive mineral testing. While waiting for results, I continued mapping the underground pipe system. Using a metal detector borrowed from a neighbor, I traced an intricate network running beneath my entire property. The pipes formed a complex grid, like an underground irrigation system, but far more sophisticated than anything from the 1880s. Some sections were deeper than others, and the metal composition seemed to vary. In certain areas, my metal detector went crazy, squealing with readings off the charts. 3 weeks later, the soil analysis results arrived. I sat in my kitchen, hands trembling as I read the report. The soil contained significant concentrations of neodymium, europium, and terbium, rare earth elements worth thousands of dollars per pound in today's market. But the real shock was the concentration levels. According to the report, my farm contained some of the highest-grade rare earth deposits ever documented in North America. The estimated value, based on current market prices, was staggering. I called the testing company to confirm the results. "Sir," the technician said, "we ran the tests 3 times because we couldn't believe the numbers. Your property is sitting on what could be the most valuable rare earth deposit in the continental United States." My legs gave out, and I sank into my grandfather's old chair. All those years of struggle, all the mockery from neighbors, all the failed crops, and underneath it all lay a treasure worth more than I could comprehend. but I wasn't ready to celebrate yet. Something about the sophisticated pipe system bothered me. The mining technology described in the 1880s records couldn't have created such an elaborate network. Someone had been here more recently, and they'd known exactly what lay beneath this soil. The county records revealed more than I'd expected. The Blackstone Mining Company hadn't just extracted minerals. They'd been conducting experimental processing techniques. According to a newspaper article from 1886, they'd developed a revolutionary extraction method that promised to change the mining industry forever. Then, abruptly, everything stopped. The last newspaper mention was a brief notice about an industrial accident that killed 3 workers. Within months, Blackstone had declared bankruptcy and abandoned the site. But the pipe system I'd discovered was definitely more recent than the 1880s. The metal composition and manufacturing techniques were clearly from the mid-20th century. Someone had returned to this site, probably in the 1950s or 1960s, and installed a sophisticated extraction network. I drove to the State University and met with Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a geology professor specializing in rare earth minerals. When I showed her my soil samples and photographs of the pipe system, her eyes widened. "This is extraordinary," she said, examining the metallic residue under a microscope. "These aren't just rare earth deposits. This appears to be a concentrated processing site. Someone was refining these minerals on site, which would explain the unusual soil composition." She paused, studying the pipe photographs more carefully. "The extraction network you've found suggests a much larger operation than anything documented in your county records. This level of sophistication would have required significant investment and advanced knowledge of rare earth processing." "But who would have done this secretly?" Dr. Chen looked up from her microscope with a grave expression. "During the Cold War, the U.S. government conducted numerous classified mining operations for strategic materials. Rare earth elements were crucial for early electronics and defense applications. If this site was reactivated in the 1950s or 1960s, it might have been a classified federal project. My grandfather's farm hadn't just been sitting on a treasure. It had been the site of a secret government mining operation. Armed with Dr. Chen's analysis, I filed Freedom of Information Act requests with multiple federal agencies. The responses took months, but when they arrived, they confirmed my suspicions. The site had been reactivated in 1957 as part of a classified Defense Department project called Operation Earthbound. The declassified documents, heavily redacted, revealed that the government had identified my grandfather's farm as containing strategic mineral deposits essential to national defense. They'd leased the mineral rights secretly, conducting extraction operations while my grandfather continued farming the surface. That explained everything. The mysterious decline in crop yields, the strange soil composition, the sophisticated underground network. For nearly a decade, the government had been quietly mining beneath my grandfather's feet, leaving behind a landscape contaminated with valuable rare earth residue. The operation had ended abruptly in 1966, according to the documents, due to environmental concerns and changing strategic priorities. The site was sealed, the equipment abandoned, and the whole project classified. My grandfather probably never knew what was happening beneath his land. He'd just watched his once productive farm slowly deteriorate, never understanding that his soil was being systematically altered by a secret government operation. But now, decades later, those same alterations had created something extraordinary. The rare earth contamination that had ruined my grandfather's crops was now worth millions. The abandoned extraction network had left behind a concentrated deposit of the world's most valuable minerals. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by government documents and soil analysis reports, finally understanding the full scope of what I'd inherited. This wasn't just a farm. It was the remnant of a Cold War-era mining operation, and I was sitting on the largest privately owned rare earth deposit in North America. The question now was, what was I going to do about it? Word leaked out faster than I'd expected. Within weeks of my discoveries, my phone started ringing constantly. Mining companies, government contractors, and private investors all wanted to talk. The offers started small, a few $100,000 for mineral rights, but quickly escalated as word spread about the deposit's true value. The first serious offer came from Titan Mining Corporation, $2.3 million for exclusive extraction rights. I hung up, my hands shaking. That was more money than I'd ever imagined. But Dr. Chen had warned me that initial offers would be lowball attempts to capitalize on my inexperience. Don't take the first offer, she'd advised. Or the second, or probably the third. What you have is genuinely rare, and these companies know it. My neighbors' attitudes changed overnight. The same people who'd mocked my patchwork farming were suddenly very interested in being friendly. Jake, my cousin who'd laughed at my inheritance, showed up with a six-pack and a sheepish grin. So, heard you might be sitting on something valuable, he said, trying to sound casual. Even old Mr. Henderson, who'd been telling everyone I should sell to developers, came by with a different tune. You know, son, I've always thought that land had potential. If you ever need a partner for development. The attention was overwhelming. Reporters started calling, wanting to write about the accidental millionaire farmer. I had to disconnect my landline and change my cell number twice. But the most interesting call came from a representative of the Department of Defense. They wanted to meet, claiming the government still had strategic interests in the property. The conversation was polite but carried an undertone that made me nervous. I realized I was in over my head. This wasn't just about farming anymore. I was dealing with national security implications, international mining conglomerates, and enough money to change my life forever. The offers kept escalating. Titan Mining came back with $4.7 million. A Chinese consortium offered $6.2 million. A consortium of American tech companies bid $8.1 million, emphasizing the patriotic duty of keeping rare earth minerals in domestic hands. I hired a lawyer, the best mining rights attorney I could find. Sarah Martinez had handled similar cases and immediately recognized the significance of my situation. You're not just selling mineral rights, she explained during our first meeting. You're potentially controlling a strategic resource that could impact national security and international trade. That gives you enormous leverage, but it also makes this incredibly complicated. The bidding war attracted national attention. Financial news networks ran stories about the rare earth gold rush happening on a small farm in rural America. My property value had gone from worthless to potentially the most valuable private land in the country. But the pressure was intense. Representatives from various companies started showing up unannounced, making increasingly aggressive pitches. Some offered partnership deals, others wanted outright purchase of the entire property. A few hinted at consequences if I chose the wrong buyer. The Department of Defense meeting finally happened in a sterile conference room at the county courthouse. 3 officials in dark suits explained that the government retained certain strategic interests in the property based on the previous extraction operations. We're not trying to intimidate you, the lead official said, though his presence was definitely intimidating. We just want to ensure that any development serves American interests. The Chinese consortium's offer hit $12 million. The American tech companies responded with $15 million plus royalty agreements. Titan Mining, apparently backed by new investors, bid $18.5 million. I stood in my fields that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, trying to process numbers that had no meaning in my previous life. A year ago, I'd been a failed farmer with a worthless inheritance. Now I was potentially one of the wealthiest landowners in America. But something felt wrong about the whole situation. The final offers were staggering. The highest bid reached $23.7 million from a consortium that included American tech giants, defense contractors, and a sovereign wealth fund. The money would set me up for life, my children's lives, and probably their children's lives. But lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of my grandfather's old farmhouse, I kept thinking about his struggle. He'd worked this land for decades, never knowing that beneath his feet lay the solution to all his problems. The government had secretly mined his property, ruining his crops and his livelihood, then walked away without compensation or explanation. I thought about the neighbors who'd mocked my efforts, the suppliers who'd treated me like a joke, the community that had written off this land as worthless. They'd all been wrong, but not because they'd missed obvious signs of value. They'd been wrong because they'd judged based on surface appearances, never digging deeper to understand what lay beneath. The next morning, I called Sarah Martinez with my decision. "I'm not selling," I told her. "What? But the offers are—" "I know what the offers are, but this land has been in my family for 4 generations. My grandfather never got to see its value realized. I'm going to extract the minerals myself." It was an audacious plan. I'd need investors, partners, environmental permits, and expertise I didn't possess. But I'd also retain control of the operation and ensure that the profits stayed in the community that had supported this land for over a century. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "It's risky," she finally said. "You could lose everything if the operation fails." "Or I could build something lasting," I replied, looking out at the fields where my grandfather had struggled for so many years. Something he would have been proud of. The decision felt right in a way that no amount of money could match. 6 months later, I stood in the same fields where I'd first discovered the mysterious pipes. But everything had changed. A small, environmentally conscious extraction operation was taking shape, designed to minimize surface disruption while maximizing mineral recovery. I'd partnered with Dr. Chen's university research team and a sustainable mining company that specialized in rare earth extraction. The operation would employ local workers, contribute to community development, and establish a trust fund for environmental restoration. The neighbors who'd once mocked my patchy crops now watched with respect and curiosity. Some had even invested in the operation, becoming partners in the venture they'd once ridiculed. Mr. Henderson, my formerly skeptical neighbor, had become one of my strongest supporters. "You did something I never could have imagined," he told me one evening as we watched the sunset over the extraction site. "You turned failure into something meaningful." The first mineral shipment had yielded enough revenue to pay off the farm's debts and fund the next phase of operations. Conservative estimates suggested the deposit would provide steady income for decades, possibly generations. But the real satisfaction came from something deeper. I'd honored my grandfather's memory by refusing to simply cash out and walk away. The land that had frustrated him for so many years was finally revealing its true value, and that value would benefit the community that had sustained it. Standing in those fields as evening approached, I ran my hands through the same dark soil that had once seemed cursed. Now I understood its secret. Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden beneath the surface, waiting for someone patient enough to dig deeper and persistent enough to see beyond appearances. My grandfather's legacy wasn't just the land itself, but the lesson that real value often lies buried beneath layers of struggle, waiting for the right moment to be discovered.